am. I'm going to start with a little introduction and first say welcome to everyone who's here. If you can have your camera on, some of you already do, then that's fantastic. If you can't, that's okay as well, but it's nice to see the faces if possible. My name's Irina Dumitrescu. I'm your host for this evening. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to Intellect. This is my first time on this side of the salon table, as it were, the virtual salon table. I've been a guest with Anna hosting a couple of times, but it's my first time hosting a salon. And it's my very great pleasure to be in conversation today with Natasha Joukovsky, who is a woman of many skills and possibly nine lives. It's really an astounding biography to read, even in its short form. Natasha's some of you may have already read on her website. Has studied English at the University of Virginia, and then did an MBA at NYU. So we already have kind of two areas of expertise or lives. Then she worked in the art world at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And she's now balancing at least two careers that I know of. You might correct me if I've missed anything. She's a subject matter expert at Accenture, where she invented and patented a recursive estimation algorithm. And I wish I could tell you I knew what that meant.
Mhm.
But maybe she will explain to us what that means. I looked it up, but it doesn't mean that I know what it means. And is also a novelist and an essayist. Naturally, she has a Substack, which is modestly called Quite Useless. She published a modern take on the narcissist myth called The Portrait of a Mirror in 2021. And her newest book, which I have printed out here in ARC form, is called Medium Rare, which came out last month from Melville House. So today we are going to be talking about the novel, but also using it as a jumping off point for the conversation about fame, about prophecy, love, status, and possibly also basketball. Natasha, welcome to the salon.
Thank you. What an introduction, Irina. I'm quite chuffed.
Well, you should be. Yeah, you should be. I don't know how you've done
Yeah.
it all, but I think that's also an
Uh,
annoying thing when people ask, right?
I mean, well, like anybody else, you can do everything, just only one thing at a time. I mean, you yourself have, all your reviews and essays in the TLS, London Review of Books and type places, and a professor, and you have a book coming out. I don't know how you do anything, how you do
My secret
everything
is there are multiple
either.
Irina Dumitrescus, and
Yeah,
they're
that's
just,
right.
you
That's
know.
right.
Thank you, Neha. That's very kind. So I was going to say a couple of words about me. I come at this topic from a totally different angle. I think some of you know that I'm a medievalist. I especially work on medieval English literature. I've also been working on I take a million years to write books, and I'm working on a very slow burn book about the medieval roots of modern celebrity. So I've also been thinking about fame and celebrity from the medieval angle, sort of thinking about what the beginnings of it look like. And I have to say, as someone who grew up in North America but has been away from um, North America and especially from the States since 2012, the I also come at this sort of North American status positioning. That's such a theme in Medium Rare from a distance. Now it's come to seem sort of supernatural in its own right once you're a little bit further away from it. Um, Two more notes before we get going. I just wanted to say I'm going to suggest that you pop up a virtual hand if you want to say something. I've prepared questions for Natasha, and I'm sure we'll have a loose conversation around them, but we don't have to do it one and then the other. So if things come up with you, feel free to signal your interest and I'll call on you. And the other thing I have to say is that I have a little bit of a cold. So I have some Carpathian honey here next to me. I have some water, and I'm going to try to mute myself if I start to hack like something horrible. But bear with me if I have to do that. So I thought I would just start because the novel is so new. I thought I would just start by giving us a very quick, a little recap, just the quickest possible nutshell version of Medium Rare. And I have to say, Natasha, I think you could give any dad a run for his money in terms of the puns. You love wordplay.
I
I
do.
say that with respect.
I do. I really do. I haven't been compared to a dad for it yet, though, with the dad jokes, but I think that is probably extremely fair.
Yeah. Every word it has at least three meanings, and the title I think at least three or four meanings that get worked out throughout the book. But the short version of the book, for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet, Phil Phaeton, who's wonderfully named like Phaeton, is this painfully ordinary man, a Washington D.C. lobbyist who chances through, as far as I can tell, no particular skill on the perfect March Madness bracket. And he wins a $1 billion bet along the way. This is not a spoiler. This is kind of a $1 billion. It's not a spoiler, it's kind of obvious as you go in that this is probably going to happen. And this catapults him into the not quite stratosphere of minor celebrity, of a kind of C range celebrity. And we get to see his rise and what happens afterwards through the eyes of a fellow alum from UVA. This is a very UVA book. Uh, Cassandra, who is a kind of friend, not quite friend, but one of these sort of college acquaintances. And as you might guess from her name, she has the curse of the original Cassandra, which is that she can foresee the truth, but no one believes her when she tries to tell them. And she's a fundraiser. She moonlights as a novelist because I guess, Natasha, your characters also have to have multiple jobs. They're also multitaskers. And as the novel progresses, it's not quite clear to what extent she wants to help Phil and his wife Raleigh, and to what extent she wants a plot out of them. So that's kind of the nutshell. I think of the novel as falling into two halves. There's a lot of basketball at the beginning. There's a March Madness story, which is very thrillingly told, and then there's what happens after it. And Natasha, I wanted to start. I read in an interview that you actually were not necessarily a huge fan of basketball when you started writing the novel. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit of the story of how you came to this, because I was sure that you loved it. I was sure when I was reading the passages that you were, a passionate fan of basketball.
I I became one in writing while I was maniacally watching the games. I joke I went full Ahab on them. But I wasn't until I got into it and started writing the novel. So my love of basketball developed more alongside Cassandra's than as opposed to it being a pre-existing thing. What I had a pre-existing love of was statistics. I think that the bracket math associated with March Madness specifically is fascinating, and I've been fascinated by it, since I was much so younger. I've always loved filling out the March Madness brackets, even going back to college at UVA, even though I knew nothing about basketball. I never actually attended a UVA game when I was a student. I did grow up in State College, Pennsylvania, which is much more of a American football than a basketball school, but I grew up going to a lot of the women's basketball games at Penn State. But I didn't have any particular affinity for it, aside from the math, until I actually started writing. I will even say that the high concept around a guy with a perfect March Madness bracket, that wasn't even my idea. It was my husband's, who is a huge basketball fan. But as soon as he said it, I realized, oh, that's the Icarus myth. That's the Phaeton myth, which are really, I think, in a lot of ways, very, very similar myths that have a lot of parallels. And once I landed on that, I really couldn't get the idea out of my head. And the more basketball I watched in writing the book, the more I genuinely came to love it, and went back and reinserted some of the more emphatically fanny sorts of passages that come toward the beginning of the book. Most of those were inserted later after I'd read the first draft, after
So
I'd
you
written
had
the
to
first
kind of
draft.
write yourself into basketball fandom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it.
Do you think you got to enjoy it because there's something about the sport that appeals to you, or simply because you just spent a lot of time with it?
Only in retrospect. It was through watching it that I realized there were things that appealed to me about it, and specifically to the brand of basketball that Tony Bennett and the 2019 national champion team illustrates, which comes to a head in the second half, maybe somewhere, I can't even remember. It comes to a head at some point around the fact that they played like women, because it is a situation where, because of the manner of play, they slow the tempo down in order to, and show patience and teamwork. It's all about passing, and it's not star ball, right? This is teamwork based, patient, long drawn out offensive possessions, slow the tempo to be able to hang in the game with anybody. But the problem is with this is, at the same time, when you start getting better talent, which Tony Bennett started doing, the very strategy, this very patient, kind of more feminine strategy, I'm gonna say, that serves underdog teams so well, also makes you a target when you're no longer an underdog, because if you condense the number of possessions, you rely more and more on the risk of a smaller number of events, basically.
Mm.
And so if you have a very, very good team and a mediocre team, if each of them are, if you're in like more of like a 90 point game, 100 point game, the chances of the better team rising go up. So when you have that, and UVA often did. I think I call it out in a couple places where, there's the other teams are winning with like 99 points in, the Sweet 16, and UVA wins one with like 56, right? But it's a high risk, high reward thing increasingly as you have better talent yourself. It's a better strategy for underdogs than it is for top dogs, for Goliaths.
I had to thank you for this. I had to ask you this because I'm married to a basketball fan, and I've had to grow to like it as well. Ever since the Mavs made it into, I think it was the finals in 2006, which I watched in the middle of the night in
There
Berlin.
you go.
So it gets you at some point, right? So now I just watch Luka Doncic sometimes when I'm feeling down on life, because I need to see a man who drinks alcohol and smokes cigars and still wipes the floor with his enemies. But I wanted to ask you. So first of all, welcome. We've had a couple more people come in, and I just wanted to say, I've suggested at the beginning you just pop in anytime, and if you want to ask a question, lift your hand, or you can put it into the chat, and I can read it out for you. But I wanted to ask. I actually wanted to ask if basketball is a good sport to write about. If you think it's actually really, if it's what is it? Is it what does it give you as a novelist? As what does
It
it give you narratively?
it was so natural for me to write about, but then again, I'm not sure that any other sport would have been necessarily easier or harder as what I would say pseudo satirical novelist. Anna, who's on, actually has the best description that I've heard of this, in that my work they're novels that are pretending to pretend. There's a satirical element, but they also hit too close to home with more of a hyper realistic tendency, and that is winky and tongue in cheek and not totally. Oh, thank you, Anna. Like Chekhov. But now I've lost the thread of where we
We
were
were
headed
talking
on
about
this.
basketball and what it gives you narratively for any sport.
The sport to me, I don't think that basketball would be particularly easier or harder to relay. What made it so natural and so easy for me is because there was the televised performance of it, that I was able to watch. Honestly, I watched it. When I say I went full Ahab, I watched these games over and over. I internalized the cadence of the sports commentators. I was thinking about of how that cadence of the commentators reflected and mirrored the cadence that you get on CNN from Dana Bash and Gloria Borger. And so I think any televised sporting event I would have found equally easy or hard. There's not something specific about basketball in that way. I don't think, but I will say that it really helped that I was using real basketball instead of trying to make up a dramatic cadence of the game. And this is something that actually really freed me up to devote more mental resources to the more original parts of the novel and what I was overlaying onto the basketball, because the basketball was just there and the story was so good in and of itself and so easy to write. When I originally conceived of this novel, I imagined it being set in the near future, as kind of playing on the idea that there's always next year. It would be perpetually set next year. That was the original conceit, but then COVID happened, and that sort of next yearness really had a rupture in reality that made that feel wrong. And UVA had this amazing run that, of course, all of my friends from college were obsessed with. I was, yay, okay, great. I was half invested, and I had to change my tactic. But I think I kept it in changing the tactic. It really freed up the mental energy for stuff outside of basketball. I'm not sure there's anything that's ever come more naturally to me than writing the basketball in this book.
And so, it's interesting because I noticed that in the language that I actually thought, how did you get all the words and all the expressions for the different plays? But now you've just explained that you, you absorbed this.
It's mimicry. It is internalizing, almost like a novelistic impression, like you would see on SNL or something to some extent. If maybe I'm trying to mirror it with a little bit more fidelity, maybe a little oomph, but more fidelity. Yeah,
So it was actually interesting, a question I had for the end, but in the sense you've brought it up now
yeah,
was
yeah.
the question of timing, right? Because
Hmm.
I found it quite bold that you bold, this sounds like a passive aggressive thing to say. I found it thrilling and dangerous that
I'll take it.
you set the novel in a recent timeline, right? And that
Hmm.
it's not just because it's interspersed with real events, because I think that often does happen in fiction, right? That you
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
But it's so specific. It has so many very particular, the style notes are specific. You have this dense texture of classical references and literary references, but you also have this dense texture of
Mhm.
references that you really have to be in a particular place and a particular time to get.
Yeah.
Many of
Yep.
them went right over my head because I haven't been in the States for over 14 years, right? Maybe you could tell me a little bit what you're thinking. I guess,
Yeah.
who are you? How do you imagine the book being read in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years?
Well, I did my undergraduate thesis on Ulysses and the Wasteland, and originally in more of a pseudo scholarly or, scholarly in training, wannabe scholarly context, I really took to tradition and the individual talent and the idea of art, the best art, trying to capture the timeless and the temporal, and the timeless and the temporal together. And specifically, that Joyce with Ulysses, that a way to do that is to return to myth and set something in, very, very specifically in time. So this combination is following right out of that tradition that I, want to be part of, that I am self-consciously referring back to and alluding to what I like to call the mythic puzzle tradition that Joyce kind of pioneers, but then you see again with Infinite Jest in a really big way. And there's probably no single novel inspired medium rare more than Infinite Jest from a like point of inspiration perspective, the idea of a near future,
Mm.
but then near past, almost because of historical events, if you will.
I think it makes for a really interesting tension, right? Because you're kind of, in a way, you're shuttling back and forth between times. I mean, just like you said, you're in the eternal, and then you're in the repetition, right? There's a way
Yeah.
that these characters echo
Yep.
past characters, and then you're in a very specific moment, and then you're in the replays of that moment on television.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's a texture to this that is recursive and is one of the mathematical concepts and visual concepts, and also, many different genres of relevance, but that I was super obsessed with in my first novel and carries over in maybe a more subtle degree into medium rare, the idea of echoes and reflections, and the way the past and the present co-evolve in that sort of back and forth recursive interplay where the past defines defines the future, even as sometimes you're trying to break from it. And I think it's endlessly interesting. And another, think this was my backup plan after the near future didn't work, because it's what I did in my first book. I mean, The Portrait of Amir came out in 2021 and is set in 2015. So very kind of similar, natural. It was a natural thing to do when my first idea was no longer working for me.
I'll just send a little reminder to the group that if you want to pop in with a question,
Please jump in
that
if
you
you
don't,
want
well, I will blab on quite
to.
happily, but it doesn't have to be just me. But while the participants are thinking, I wanted to ask you, um, so you talked about the statistics, right? The
Yeah.
math being sort of what's appealing about March Madness, and I get a sense that we definitely have an ocean between us in this one respect, because statistics is the one math that never made sense in my head.
Oh, really? It's the
I
only one that made sense to
Oh
me.
God, I love calculus and geometry and all of that, and statistics, my brain stops. Neha, do you want to go ahead? We can put a pin in the statistics.
Yes. You said that you are trying writing a contemporary novel. Obviously,
Yeah.
has its challenges, but I think part of the challenge of writing a contemporary novel right now is that there are way too many interesting things happening. Like it's just so
Hmm.
rich, and it's kind of hard to uh, be add any sort of like transformation to it because every single transformation somehow of the same news also tends to exist. So I'm really curious about your process as to how you like sort of picked things that you wanted to include, and what lens did you use for that?
Oh, I think a lot of that was just intuitive and goes back to watching and rewatching the games, watching and rewatching the news, just being alive and what pops up over and over. There are some words that you hear that start then becoming touch points in my mind. Like I'm always paying attention now when I hear the word unprecedented because it is the most ridiculous word to be applying in so many contexts in which it is used, and the sheer frequency with which these news anchors and sports anchors and anchors of anchors all say that things are unprecedented is just in and of itself a like patently ridiculous. Like the repetition alone undercuts what they are trying to trying to say. So I think that I'm I'm looking for patterns at the end of the day. And when I'm seeing the same type of thing pack up pop up in multiple arenas, like this is a novel of arenas, of the sports arena, the political arena, the Hollywood arena. And when I start seeing patterns of things that are happening in multiple arenas, that's when I'm paying attention and realizing, okay, this is a specific thing that I want to work in somehow because it forms some of the connective tissue into what the project really becomes, which I think if you look at not just medium rare, but the tradition of mythic puzzle novels more generally, going back to Joyce, like one of the really big themes is around the ordinary, extraordinary, and the paradox of how of originality in repetition and the like beauty and transcendence of like individual ordinary experience. And I don't know if that answers your question about like the specific references, but I think it it comes from it all comes back to the big themes that I'm driving toward in some way. I think even when I myself don't always realize it.
Makes sense.
I wonder, I mean, maybe then I can bring back statistics because it sounds like it actually does come out of that quite
It
naturally.
does. And it's interesting that you mentioned that like you really like calculus and geometry, Irina, because was not good at those. I really think and part of my problem with math in school was that as get better and better at it in high school, it tends to be more and more calculus, physics kind of driven. And for me, my brain works in discrete math in statistics. So I found business school very a natural fit, and the discrete math I think t tends to come up more in or at least maybe less now with things moving to AI, but before there's relational databases and all of these things, so a lot more statistically driven stuff, but the the nature of that math and the tournament specifically is, I think there's a highly narrative quality to statistical discrete math that you see really brightly, lucidly in the tournament specifically, in that you have this head-to-head battle. So like every single round is a number of duels. And that is a mathematically compelling
Mm.
formula for narrative because you have, two contenders and one winner. Anything that is single elimination is like inherently dramatic, and we tend to think of art and math as these separate spheres. I just think that nothing could be further from the truth. And narrative, our narrative, you can map out narrative structure geometrically. You can, think, but and there are certain mathematical patterns that make for more or less compelling narratives. And the single elimination tournament to me is like kind of the ultimate in dramatic narrative.
Fill me in just for a moment. What is discrete math?
Discrete math is like the broader spectrum of statistics, one zeros binary kind of math. I'm not going to give a good definition. I like want to kind of go to Google and let
Google
Google
it too.
like give you a better definition than I'm going to.
But not geometry and calculus, which I love, right?
No, it's the opposite. Distinct, countable mathematical structures like integers, graphs, and logic statements rather than continuous ones like calculus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Erica?
I want to keep this theme going because I was, reading the book, I kept thinking this is um, it's a very helpful way to try to stitch between the the binary Bayesian decision tree structures that we take to be sort of formative of advanced truth making in the present and the as enchanted mythic structures and also as kind of ethical and aesthetic floats. Like a game can be played many ways, and you still will win or lose, but that kind of all the stuff that is before the decision happens is the vast majority of time, on the clock, literally. And so I was thinking about, I was wondering whether or not you have had, I don't know, ways of talking to people who are sort of true believers in the discrete math side of producing
Mm.
outcomes that are unbiased or clear or objective without either the kind of human or the mythic as modes of accounting, and whether or not they, by sort of engaging with your narrative, have been able to sort of let that belief system wobble and notice how much actually there's all kinds of funny business, between the zero and the one on the regular. And how do you sort of
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
them, how do you doula them through that recognition that we're never going to be done with the enchantments?
I think it's so central to the project of the novel in reintroducing um the credibility of the intuitive in such a metricized world, and their the mutually symbiotic relationship that these sides of equations that we so often set apart have. I'm not sure. I can't speak to how I've doulaed or to what extent I've doulaed. I haven't seen, per se a review where where it's clear that I've, changed anybody's mind about something. And to be honest, most people, and I wrote the book in this way, are turning to novels and fiction for escape and entertainment. And I certainly want this to be that too. I worked very hard not to make it didactic. I don't want anything I ever produce to be so, but yeah, I mean, it's certainly a goal for people to think about it. And the inclusion of a game in such a prominent way, which I think, we've had several really good recent books about. There's CT Wins new book about games and metrics, and um, you know, he actually had an inner intellect salon recently that I attended, which was amazing. And you know, his take on some of that stuff is that like it all comes back weirdly to the qualitative definitions that underlie like the verbal definitions that underlie how we categorize metrics. And this categorization exercise is necessarily a like a biased one. Like there's more than one way to categorize everything, and how you categorize it, how you build the rules, how you set up the game is then going to drive not just the outcomes and you know who wins and who loses, but the nature of the game that you're even playing itself, what it means to win, what it means to lose. And yeah, so I'm certainly thinking about all the things you're thinking about. To what extent it's moved the needle on folks who may be more inclined to zero sum thinking. It's hard to say.
I was thinking about the fact that I mean, in a way, you there's a little bit of a provocation in on the narrative level in the kind of suspense you set up,
Mhm.
right? Because the suspense ought to be who will win this game, right? And you build the individual game scenes with that sense of suspense sort of muscled through, right? It's very muscular language, right? Kind of threaded. I'm missing, throw a metaphor in there, like pick any metaphor you like. There's a lot of suspense in the scenes with the games, right? And
Mhm.
yet, there's this pleasure in the statistics, right? But at the same time, you kind of know in the first part of the novel that the unlikeliest thing has to be the most likely
Yes.
for things to really get going, right? Or for the next game to begin. So I don't know if you want to just respond to that,
Yeah,
but I just
yeah.
find that a really kind of cheeky thing to do, right? Because you're supposed to be feeling the tension of each game, but actually you're feeling the tension, or I was as a reader feeling the tension of like, well, is she actually going to do this? Is she actually?
So I think this phenomenon that you're mentioning is something that I was doing subconsciously, but intentionally without realizing it, because I just published a piece on my Substack uh, with some thoughts on Natasha Dow Schull's addiction by design on Las Vegas casinos in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And one of the things that she says in that book and recounts speaks exactly to this, this phenomenon, which is that I've lost my train of thought again. I need to like drink more tea when I'm when I'm still trying to recover from jet lag. But I'll probably come back to it and but remind me, Irina, where we were on the your question.
You were on well, you
The
were on gambling. You were
I was
going to
gonna go to
gambling and
gambling,
casinos and the pleasure of gambling and casinos.
but
Um,
but you had mentioned something on like on the basketball side
well, so there's
of
the tension of the game, right? But the
the
games
tension of the
have to
games.
kind of have to wind up in a particular way, and that's the tension of
Yeah,
the story, right?
yeah, sorry, I've got it now. That the uncertainty in what she says or in the book is the uncertainty in gambling is a kind of false uncertainty. It's a certain uncertainty because all of these gamblers who are super addicted to it, they're not, those ones are not in it for the certainty. It actually, this uncertainty of binary, whether I know what they say things like, I know what I'm going to encounter when I go into this. Either I'm going to win or I'm going to lose. And this sort of uncertainty is such a balm against the sort of human uncertainty we have in our lives and relationships and you know so these kind of discrete math games that we've been talking about and you know gambling, poker, video poker is one of them, but sports, I think sports count too. They have in their in that tension of the moment, there is actually a release from all of the more complex tensions of life. So thank you for helping me get back to it because it was an important point. I just can't keep a thought in my brain, apparently.
That's a great point, and I think it's sort of, it explains to me why at some point, I mean, your book is not about reality television, but reality television comes up at one point, but in a way, it is about reality television, right? And in a sense, you've just explained to me what the interest is of reality television because it reduces these kinds of complex
Yeah.
stories to you're in or you're out, you get the rose or you don't.
Exactly, exactly. If you're the Bachelorette, you know it's one thing or the other, and that sort of uncertainty is just infinitely easier for us to think about, talk about, worry about. I talk about this a little bit in the Portrait of a Mirror too, about how the best balm for like big problems is small problems. So, when you have like something really, really like actually major and stressful going on, the best thing that you can do to distract from yourself from it is like focus on insignificant problems you have. So it's like problems can be a balm and uncertainty just like problems can be a balm to problems just like uncertainty can be a balm for uncertainty. And I really think that
Mm.
in the you know, grand arc of history and the project that we've seen since, I mean, you tell me how far back it goes as a medievalist, Irina, but uh, of modern societies to move from hereditary status to mutable status, the unintended consequence of that is immense uncertainty and anxiety around the uncertainty of, the status of being in a hereditary model. Really, you kind of know where you are. There's nothing you can do that's going to make you rise, but there's also nothing you can do to make to force you to fall. So you don't have that's I think we see the coevolution of choice, of anxiety, of gambling, of the of games like basketball, all and the appeal of all of these things kind of grows over time as status becomes more and more mutable, subject to uncertainty, something that whether or not individuals can, there is a perception that individuals can control.
You've just blown my mind because I was trying to think about when I think that comes in, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
everybody thinks it comes in their own period, right? This is the sort of the disease of scholars is that we always think the thing started in our time, right? But I do think there is something that happens with Christianity.
Hmm.
And that has to do with status mutability
Hmm. For
because
sure.
it makes high status available to anyone who sort of takes the right position towards the faith.
I would even take it farther in
I'm
that.
about to take it further.
Okay.
You've just made me think Christianity is then a kind of casino game, right? It is a kind of gamble.
Yeah.
That's the gamble, right? Your life will
Yes.
suck. How about you have a sucky life? Maybe you can even be torn apart by, lions in, in uh, you know, in the field. Maybe you die young, maybe you don't have children, so you don't have, immortality, but biological immortality,
Hmm.
biological descendants. Maybe you don't have sex, which also sucks, that's the gamble. The gamble is
Gamble.
I bet on the right God.
Okay, I was gonna
Bet on the
try
right thing.
take
Is
it
that what you're
farther.
gonna say?
No, I was gonna take it farther, and I love what you said, but I was gonna take it farther in a different direction, which is that Christ's whole message is the strong are the weak are the strong, the meek will inherit the earth, etc., etc. It is a very status mutable faith, and specifically kind of revolutionary topple faith. So not only are people in like a I want to say legitimate, but legitimate's the wrong word, in a genuine believer sense, like taking a gamble on faith, but like political figures and adopting Christianity versus whatever it is, paganism, and you can even go with Protestantism and Catholicism in Britain, and the way it flopped back and forth. There's a mechanism here that is very gamified and gamifiable for rulers and kind of folks at the top of the hierarchy to leverage these a revolutionary faith like Christianity for the preservation of personal power.
Yeah. Neha?
I was going to ask about nature of uncertainty, but I'm going to try to take it backwards from where we are right now. Also, I'm going to steal your line, Irina. It really did blow my mind when you talked about, like just like the fixed nature of uncertainty in sport. I almost think of it as chance. People want to take chances. But like the question, the conversation about Christianity, I almost think what actually happened was that it created a new arena, which was the afterlife. So there is a new
Yes.
game to play, and I think
Mhm.
it really makes the life of people whose life in the fixed arena was not very good, and so it does give people something to do in the afterlife and the creation of the arena. And you can say this about the internet. There was a whole new set of games to play once we got on the internet. But I kind of wanted to dwell on human response, the kind of uncertainty you were talking about, the uncertainty that you're talking about in gambling and in sports, where like there are a fixed set of outcomes, and the outcome maps to a strong feeling you can feel. You win, you feel certain things. You lose, you feel certain things. But in
Mhm.
real life, where you don't have fixed set of outcomes, where it's like things are on a spectrum, it's like all it depends. I feel like that uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for people.
Yeah.
And I think some of modern anxiety is about that. It's like not knowing how to feel
Yeah.
about your status, and at some level not actually being able to compute your status,
Yes.
because your status is sort of like kind of like split, sharded across so many arenas that actually it's hard to compute. I I don't know where I'm going with this, but like I kind of want to ask you, as a writer who has thought a lot about this, how do people deal with this like it depends kind of thing, this
Yeah.
shared identity and status?
Yeah. So I think there are a few answers to that. I wrote about Alain de Botton's status anxiety recently, and he devotes like half the book to what he calls solutions. His solutions include things like philosophy, art, religion. Um, Bohemia is another one he has. I would add, after reading Natasha Schull's book, gambling, that gambling is this like really ugly solution to this problem. And one of the things she talks about that really confirmed this for me is she describes, and it's easier to access with machine gambling, and she calls it the zone, and this is what gamblers themselves are calling it, the zone, this like kind of self eliminating, totally self involved, um oneness, two-ness, becoming with the machine that makes all of those really fuzzy uncertainties just melt away, and you are permanently suspended in that zone of certain uncertainty. But what she describes as happening is that as these players get addicted to this feeling, gambling no longer becomes about winning or losing. It's about the feeling itself. It's about playing to keep playing. And this was really, really uncomfortable for me because it reminded me immediately of artistic flow and how I feel when I'm writing novels and how and she actually does end up distinguishing kind of the more positive from the more negative kinds of flow associated with that. But I think it's not a coincidence that the art and the gambling are similar here. These are both solutions. Like we are constantly looking for these big big things like religion, philosophy, art, gambling to assuage that just extremely deep anxiety. And what it ultimately comes back to, the reason that we're so afraid of uncertainty and status is, in my mind, a direct connection to the problem of immortality, which of course is more properly the problem of mortality, the fact that we exist in time and that we will come to exist no more eventually. And so the suspended state that gamblers get in the machine zone, or the flow state that you get when you lose yourself in a more positive activity, which basketball players, maybe I can see basketball players getting this, in sports, it becomes something that in basically any medium, you are transcending time, transcending space. What you are ultimately transcending is the uncertainty associated with your own mortality.
So I have to throw in a footnote and then fulfill a promise. The footnote is I was thinking about how um, one of sort of the typical medieval ways to talk about saints is as athletes for Christ, right? And
No
this,
way.
yeah,
That's
I
amazing.
mean, Google it, don't believe me,
I have
but
to. I say
there's
more.
there's this fantastic poem. Well, fantastic. I mean, fantastic is a fascinating poem by Aldhelm, I want to say 7th century English poet who writes in Latin, and he describes nuns reading as being like these Olympic athletes,
My God.
and some of them are all oiled up and wrestling in the pits, and some of them are throwing javelins, and some of them are rowing in boats, and that's actually just to describe nuns learning how to read scripture. And there's this whole athletic metaphorical level that's being used to describe people of the faith, and especially like the saints or monks, for example, monks and nuns. Um, but I think there also the promise is immortality, and reading is a sport, and you have to train it, right? I think they knew that you had to actually practice, and there were different kinds of reading, and you had to practice them in different ways. Um, but the promise I wanted to fulfill is that we said we would talk about fame, and we would talk
Hmm.
about
Yeah.
celebrity, and which are so central to medium rare,
Yeah.
and really come out of this problem of mortality too, right? Because I
Hmm.
mean, the classical fame was that you would try through doing great things, so great deeds, to become immortal, right?
Hmm.
This is sort of the standard definition.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but your protagonist Phil more stumbles into a kind of celebrity, right? I mean,
Hmm.
maybe just as a starting question, do you think there's a difference between fame and celebrity? Those are talked
Yeah.
about in different ways, but how do you use those words? Let's put it
I
that way.
I do, and I will say that between this is part of the reason that I made Cassandra not just a fundraiser, but a novelist, because I'm deliberately pitting them against each other in two different uh, paradigms of fame. And I think we can probably categorize it all as fame, but then there's different flavors of fame, one of which being celebrity. And Phil really isn't chasing celebrity to start with. Like his ambitions are very modest. He wants himself and his wife Raleigh to be more like Cassandra and her husband Miles and like, drive a Tesla and live in Georgetown, like extremely modest wants, as nice as I can attest those things are. Um, but Cassandra is out for that kind of ancient fame of great deeds, specifically artistic deeds, that will lead to not a fleeting celebrity, but a place in the canon. So you think of Cassandra as very intentionally pursuing the canon versus Phil as someone who like accidentally stumbled into celebrity. And because he hasn't been preparing for it, that's part of the reason he's unprepared. Like he gets there and he sees, oh, it's great. Um, and he wants to hold on to it and he over prioritizes it. Julia in the chat mentioned the paragraph about proxies in the novel, and fame is one of the proxies of immortality, right? And celebrity is too. So Phil is because he's unprepared, is that's part of the reason he's flying too close and going for this more, for trying to make what is fundamentally a fleeting type of fame permanent. And that's part of why his rise becomes the downfall.
Because he doesn't have the right pace.
Yeah, he doesn't have the right pace, he doesn't have the right mindset. He doesn't his desires are all um highly mimetic. He's constantly looking up to various versions of the sun. Like there's Sunny Sanders, there's Arun Patel, there's his own father in Louisiana. And so there's all of he has all of these um models, but the kind of fame that he's after is, a shallow fame that's gonna bite him.
It's interesting because I think that kind of that flavor of fame, which we call celebrity, is such a
Mhm.
specific. I mean, I will argue in the eventual book at some point that it has its roots in the Middle Ages because of course it has to have its roots in the Middle Ages. But it is, I mean, to a very great extent, it is a very specifically modern American phenomenon.
Hmm.
To the extent that it's
Hmm.
really hard to even. I don't think there isn't a word for celebrity in German, for example, that I can think of. Like you have to use
Oh, wow.
there are words for fame
Yeah.
there, but though, if you want to talk about celebrity, you have to use the English word, and I don't think it's because of the Brits.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I
It's
think that
so American. It's
it's
so
very,
American. Yeah. Mm.
I'm trying to remember what my what my point was about this, but I mean, is celebrity is partly the one American answer to the class problem, right?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And it's one of the positive uncertainties, right? Like the uncertainty can of mutable status can work for you and against you. And I think that it's kind of a false bill of goods, but the possibility of celebrity is a balm against the anxiety of social slippage and
Yeah, yeah.
being downwardly mobile. And I think one of the things we're starting to see actually is the that balance between, the promise of celebrity that America offers versus the anxiety of downward mobility. If you look in like the post-war years, basically, the celebrity has really outweighed the downward mobility, and we're kind of getting to a point where people are starting to be more anxious about becoming a member of the permanent underclass than they are enchanted by celebrity. So there is an interesting shift that's continuing to happen here as I mean, I have been joking for a while that America is my Roman Empire because and that like we're on the way down. Like it is the things maybe not, I hope not. You know, there's many ways that a graph can chart, but certainly in terms of hopefulness and some of these other the just the quantify the market power to buy a house, like millennials, Gen Z are in many cases the first sort of generations that are not better off than their boomer parents.
Erica?
Um, so just kind of continuing to develop this question about like celebrity and fame. I'm wondering, I don't know, maybe if you could, I guess this is two pieces, like to say a little more about how you think celebrity and sports gambling together, since both of those seem like signs of fortune's upheaval and threats of downward mobility, right? It's kind of
Hmm.
economic and structuring feeling and desires to
Yeah.
do something with it. So like that piece seems very like material. But then the other piece is maybe about like fame as an elusive project for serious thinkers, in part because, at least in the American context, celebrity has kind of been confounded with fame so much that the
Yeah.
kinds of conversations that make mark a distinction between like famous for what or make us uncomfortable, right? Like
Yeah.
fama and fatus are like different branches, you know, of like playing for the gods and playing, you know, is like
Yeah.
a thing that is like political scientists and economists can't, that's not their thing to talk about. And so
Right.
like
Right.
this question of other arenas, et cetera, means that we're sort of left with being able to talk about celebrity, but how do you think about, I don't know, like bringing a conversation that marks these distinctions into the realm of like serious normal inquiry, you know,
Mm.
because it's very elusive. Like I don't know what academic discipline could even own fame as a like legitimate thing, even though it's so important and structures so much human activity.
Well, I mean, you kind of own it, right? You teach a class on fame. So I think
I mean,
I'm going to nominate Erica as the owner of fame. But
I mean, it, by omission, in the sense that it's a weird thing to
yeah,
try. Like you can't go to the sociology department or the
right.
political, right. So something is up, given how centrally you configure it. And it's like a blind spot of a certain kind. So I'm
Yeah.
just wondering. I mean, I don't know how you come to see it.
I need to think about I'll answer the first part first around the prediction markets and celebrity because in case everyone didn't see Kalshi, the betting market actually did offer $1 billion prize for a perfect March Madness bracket this year. No one got it. Not actually surprising in the real world because it is statistically very, 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 very unlikely. But there was even like minutes of celebrity around that. Like separately, there was an eighth grader who had filled out not even all the way, but close to a perfect women's bracket and was, all over the internet. So I think that what these prediction markets do is condense a whole number of these threads into one place. So, betting in showing your prophetic power, what you're really doing here is showing your ability to predict the future, that is a simultaneous path to all of the things in the proxy paragraph that Julia mentioned, to wealth, to fame, to power, to continuing to play and bet, to immortality. And this is, and this is why I think that these platforms are so dangerous because everything that Natasha Schull talks about and these like mindless zombie folks in the zone, like pressing these buttons, and it's like the most depressing thing I've ever seen. But we're all doing it. Like my husband is constantly like, put down your phone, you're addicted to your phone. And I am, it's horrible. And I think most of us, or many of us, have these tendencies. And then when you combine that with the gambling, it's so immediate, so direct, so there's no there's Elliot has in Middlemarch, and I recounted this in the piece I sent out yesterday. There's a scene where Lydgate, who is really financially strapped, like his trad wife, like upwardly mobile lady, Rosamond, is just like buying him out of house and home, and he has is in desperate straits. So he heads to the Green Dragon, to try and make a little bit money, and he gets totally zonked. And what saves him there is that his brother-in-law, Fred, Rosamond's brother, like knocks him out of it and is like, "Hey, wait a minute. Like get back online. Like what are you doing? You're not a guy who gambles. This isn't like you." What is happening with Kalshi and Polymarket and all of these things is that every trace of Fred Vinci is being systematically designed out so that there is nothing to break the attention from like zone gambling for the simultaneous pursuit of all of these things, for wealth, for celebrity, for continuing to play. So that's the first part, Erica. The second part, I don't know I can't think of a better one than media studies, to be honest. I think, there's literature foreruns, a lot of stuff. So maybe that's my other answer, is that English, maybe I'm always happy to, when my book gets taught in any department, but, in some ways, especially English departments, because that's the route that I came up
I should teach you
through.
on fame
You
and
should
celebrity in the Middle
fame
Ages.
exactly, fame
Yeah.
and celebrity and literature, and you can and also like the gambling um piece of this too, Irina, especially if since you can trace it kind of from the medieval beginnings of hereditary wealth starting to break down in the rise of uncertainty. So maybe that's what I would say, is that literature is usually outrunning other academic disciplines in terms of what we're talking about.
I have a German footnote for everyone, but I want to get to
Please.
name first. Or maybe I'll give my footnote now and
Okay.
she didn't hear me. There is a novel by Robert Manasse, which I read in my 20s. And I mean, I only kind of half knew German at the time, so I only know the sketch of the plot, but it's called Selige Zeiten, brüchige Welt. And it's about a PhD student who's really stuck on his dissertation. He's writing on Hegel, if I remember correctly, and he just gets completely stuck, and he sucks at writing his dissertation, and he winds up going to Brazil, and someone hears him in a bar during a football game predict the outcome of the game, and it gets changed in the media to he used Hegel to predict the outcomes of soccer games. And then he becomes famous and has this whole career in Brazil because he can use Hegel to predict soccer games, which is obviously the most
I
useful.
need, can you put the title of this in the
Yeah,
chat, please?
I'll
Because
put it in the chat. Yeah.
I
I don't
really,
know if it's
really
been translated, but it's
need
it's
to read this.
it's the fantasy. I think I was reading it during my PhD while I was writing my PhD, and it's the fantasy of every PhD student. Like, actually, I'll just make it. It's like making it big in Japan, but it's Brazil, and
Yeah,
somehow
yeah.
your obscure topic is. But there is that fantasy of finding a system, right? Like that there's
Hmm.
going to be a system that gives you some kind of security, and um and lets you make the right bets.
Yeah.
Uh, make the right bets. Neha, you.
Hi. Um, I wanted to note two things: the interplay between playing to play and the permanent underclass. Part of the reason the phrase has been is being talked about so much is because, I mean, people are pushing for the idea that human beings as workers are going to be obsolete, not wanted, and so you don't get to play again. And
Yeah.
I think like everybody's trying to sort of like, I don't know, like there's definitely a scramble. Even people who don't believe do feel a push. And
Yeah.
to me, that's like, I don't know what happens even when I think in a way, people's instinct to gamble, take big risks, and play with their current status. I think it is also coming from the fact that they don't really believe in the afterlife. There is no afterlife. There may not be a
That's right.
play, and
Yeah.
I think there's like uh, I think it puts a pressure on culture that is somewhat toxic. And I wish we could like expand the conversation about new arenas and like positive uncertainty and things that like
Yes.
create sort of a ladder, a new game, a new
Oh man,
trajectory. Uh,
you're speaking my language.
I wanted to say something else to you, which I think is like I thought of it while you guys were talking about religion. I don't think that much about religion. I grew up in India. Religion is such a big part of life. It's almost like you're a fish and there's water. You don't notice. But resurrection, which is a very, very important thing in Hinduism, is kind of a recursion. Not
Hmm.
just that you will have an afterlife, but you get to come back and play different roles. And so
Yes.
there is some sort of like a shaping thing where like you can actually deal with your sorrow differently when you believe in such
Hmm.
a infinite game that you get to play, which I think is very interesting. Like there's a contentment that comes with believing in that part of religion. But I'm really curious, like you have thought a lot about uh yeah, I guess status and playing to play and like I think these instincts people feel. And how do you think if the prophecy of AGI comes to pass, people are going to deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think AGI or not, we have the same issue, which ironically has already been solved, and we just can't implement it. So I am a very, very massive, like politically speaking, fan of guy named John Rawls. And I think that he basically figured out how we can capture the upside without, while limiting the anxiety. And the answer here is there has to be a human floor, a a baseline of material resources and healthcare and dignity and all of these things that we as a collective society think that no human being should fall below. And there's plenty of money to, in all of these rich it's at least in rich Western societies to make that a a reality. And but the other thing I love about Rawls is that it's not a kind of flat communism. And communism really, really doesn't work because it really, really doesn't work. And the reason for that is if you take away dollars as the points, people just make something else into the points. People care so, so much about relative status. Status is called, referred to as a ladder so often because that's what it is. Like, and there are only so many, even if everybody has their basic needs met, there are only so many apartments that face on Central Park South, right? Like there are limited resources and there will need to be some way to think about those things. And the answer is a baseline floor with no ceiling. And this is, what Rawls works out in extraordinary technical detail how to achieve this. And for I think for a pretty long time, the academics can disagree or correct me on this, but I think for a pretty long time, like Rawlsian liberalism was kind of the gold standard in terms of the like uh, the political philosophy that makes sense, and we just need to like continue moving closer to it and work more than more to implement it. This is part of the reason that I think Ronald Reagan is the ultimate villain of all history, because when you look at Ronald Reagan, that's when that project starts going in the other direction, and we stop working toward the floor, and we start crumbling away at the floor without doing anything about the ceiling. And so now everybody's so focused on the ceiling. Oh, billionaires, billionaires. Billionaires are only the problem relative to the fact that there are so many people with unmet needs below what anyone could conceive of as a reasonable floor for human dignity. So I'm all about the ideas of ceilingless floors, and I think that if you actually want to tackle the problem of status anxiety, you have to create a floor below which you cannot fall.
Do you think that would really solve it though?
I don't think it would solve all of it, but I think it would solve some of it. I mean, people are always, I don't think there is any getting around um that people like relative status jockeying necessarily, and there's people are all, as long as things are mutable, like the answer to that anxiety is worse than I think worse than the anxiety itself, which is basically hereditary or some kind of fixed status where you can't move up or down, and people really, 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 really don't like that either. So I'm not saying that it's all fixable, Rena, but I do think that it seriously ameliorates it to know that there is only so far that you can fall. But what do you think? Maybe you disagree.
I think I was thinking, I was musing right now on um, a conversation I sort of listened in on a couple of days ago, where a woman who really doesn't have a lot of money she said to somebody else, "Do I look rich to you?" You know,
Mm,
and he said to her, I know some rich people and you can't always tell. I work in a place where I've seen rich people and you can't always tell. And this was, I mean, in the German context, it's very interesting because there is a very weird class system here, which I really haven't figured out yet. And it becomes more mysterious to me all of the time, which maybe every class system is like that. The more time you spend in it, the weirder it is. But here, people really don't show money. And if they show it,
mhm,
it's in very specific, understated ways.
mhm,
And I know of people who are extremely wealthy who live in completely normal houses and do everything they can. You do not show wealth in Germany. You do not show wealth in Germany. You do your very best. If people are showing their wealth, then they have to go to special places and show it off to each other there. And yeah, it's quite fascinating. And yet it's a super hierarchical society. But the status then becomes things like titles, which are kind of academic titles, sort of have replaced nobility, titles of
yeah.
nobility.
I
Um, Very strange. It's a very strange,
that
it's super hierarchical, and the titles allow you access to truth and allow you to determine what is truth. In a
Yeah.
way that I don't think anyone would say about a duke or a count in England, that that person knows what the truth is. So I think it's just completely wacky status, class system that I
Yeah.
was trying to sort of take what you were saying and
Well,
transfer it over.
and this goes to you're in Germany, and yet you're not as anxious about the German status system as the native Germans, because oftentimes you like you're able to stand apart in a way, as expat. It's true when when you go and travel too. Foreigners are often not held to the same standards as locals. But I think more generally, it's these status like ranking, there are so many different flavors and ways, and you can move from one context to another and change statuses and change what you yourself are ranking status on. But a lot of the difference you're describing to me is more aesthetic than foundational. And you actually a place that you can see this in, really really nicely is between like the Louise and Marie Antoinette in her gardens. Like if you look at the garden wars of the 18th and 19th century, you can see this like recursive sophisticated status one-upmanship happening where you have like really, really rich, like do they look rich? Like really, really rich looking Louis gardens, but then Marie Antoinette goes in the Trianons and like takes more of like the Chinese gardening aspect. It doesn't mean that everything isn't precisely cultivated, but it's meant to look natural or it's meant to look minimal, right? Or it's part of the status in, what you're describing with in the German class system. But also I think, 30, 40 years ago, this was very much the case in, New England too, for instance, is you get this with the Protestant work ethic is that part of your status is coming from not being showy. You are being not showy. You are being minimal better than the other one. We saw the latest version of this in Quiet Luxury like 2 years ago, and now it's springing back. And, it is a recursive mimetic cycle around whatever the tastemakers are doing because as soon as their taste gets copied, the thing that doesn't go out of style is status itself, whether it's by money, by titles, by academic credentials, in whatever context you're talking about, people are gonna care.
It's like white bread and brown bread.
Yeah.
The Middle Ages, the white bread is the best thing you can get. But
Yes.
I have to give my little East European correction.
Okay,
I
please.
do have I have very clear status here.
You
Only
have
I have
clear.
two statuses, right?
Okay,
I can
okay.
flip because I'm Romanian, but I grew up in Canada and I have American degrees in North American English. So I can flip from high status to low status very quickly because Romanians here are builders and they work temporary jobs and they deliver the mail and they, take care of old people and they do sex work and
Mm,
right and pick vegetables during pandemics in
mm,
unsafe conditions. But North Americans have nice Ivy League degrees and an attractive
mm-hmm,
kind of English and
mm-hmm,
recognize, come from, especially if it's from the States, but also Canada is beloved.
mm-hmm.
So I can flip very quickly between statuses
In the German, you're saying in the German.
in the
Oh,
German
I
system.
didn't
Yeah.
know that the German
In
system had this kind of
Europe
sense
does.
of
I think,
okay,
outside of
okay,
Europe, people think Europe
okay.
is Europe, but inside of Europe, Europe is not Europe. There's
Yes.
East and West, and
Sure,
there's South and
sure.
North, right?
Oh, that's so
These are
interesting.
very different things, and it's about who's
Yeah.
picking the vegetables for who,
Mm-hmm.
who's
Mm-hmm.
holding on to whose passport. So
Yeah. No, I think
it's
Americans have it too. We just don't know each other. This is kind of what I'm talking about is that you come in and maybe you're an insider outsider if you're from Eastern Europe and then educated in the States and then in Western Europe. It's very
I mean,
interesting. Go.
sorry, yeah, this is the first thing I'm going to say during the salon.
Ah,
But no, I mean, America definitely has it. Like everybody
yeah.
thinks I'm Scandinavian, and if I just leave it at that, I'm high status. If reveal that I'm Eastern European, then they will be like, "Oh, my cleaning lady is Polish." Like that's a very, 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 very different status. That's
Mm.
like a GDP gap, which is kind of funny because Poland is coming up. So I'm like, you will enjoy your Polish cleaning lady while you have her because that world is going away. No, it's enormous. I mean, the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
With
Yeah. Yeah.
they finally don't have it with India, like the stuff that India has internally with North and South, which is massive. Here they don't have it.
Mm.
so I want to bring the conversation around to love,
Oh,
just to really
yes. Me
Do
too.
not end on the Eastern European.
Because you
Yes,
can't end
no.
on
Yes.
Eastern European trauma. That's no good place to end on because that we won't end if that's where we wind up. But I was trying to, we said we would talk about that in the salon description, but I was also trying to think about, the world of medium rare, maybe the world we've been talking about of these
Hmm.
games and this kind of very delicate and refined status
Hmm.
positioning, um, and the fear, and trying to think about who can be, how, what kind of love is possible in this world.
Yeah.
And specifically, I mean, I was thinking about a problem that your narrator Cassandra faces, which is that because she's a Cassandra, she knows the truth. No one will believe her. But then that puts her into a situation without giving away. I don't think this gives away the plot because this is what a Cassandra is. But that puts her in a situation where it's very difficult to have a friendship
Yeah.
because the assumption is that friends ought to be honest with one another. And yet
Yeah.
any honesty on her part will be rebuffed.
Yeah.
And she knows that from the start, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, what, where does love, I mean, love is a, topic in your novel, but it seems
Hmm.
quite a hard fit in all of these, um, this kind of world that you've built, uh,
Hmm.
this game world, of status and jockeying and numbers.
But I think that part of, I envisioned this novel as a series of Trojan horses, as, a broy basketball novel enwrapping a novel of female friendship, which is, very much a love story in this case, a certain kind of love, right? Um, Enwrapping just a human novel and more of the philosophy and ideas that we've been talking about. And I think those inner two layers, part of it goes back to what we were talking about the intuitiveness of math and the non-mutually exclusive nature of intuition and more like these more metrics driven things. And Joshua calls it the actuarial self, which I just think is so perfect and kind of what we've been talking about. And you can actuary yourself on like any different standard, but really love is awfully resistant to it. So it is a kind of anecdote. And I think in a similar way to that we, turn to things like religion, gambling, art, whatever it is, to as a balm for the uncertainty of mortality. I think that like the actuarial self and the like the hyper status competition is something that we often turn to in the absence of love. And it is actually kind of a coping mechanism for not feeling that because it feels like it should be a way to get more. And it really isn't. Um, Unfortunately or fortunately, whatever it may be. But I'm not sure if that answers what you were thinking effectively, Irina. Tell me.
I was actually thinking about, I was thinking about this problem of sort of the person, the person who knows the truth, right? But can't really share it with their friend,
Hmm.
because it won't be accepted. And actually, that's a universal problem. You don't have to
Hmm.
be, or a seer to be in that
Yeah,
position.
sure,
Right? We
sure.
often know the truth. And this led me, um, to a Saturday Night Live clip that I rewatched. I don't know if it was 1 or 2 days ago. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I can sort of dig it out of on YouTube. It's basically one of their music video clips. I think it had Tina Fey and Cardi B and 80, like it's basically the women are in the club, the friends are in the club, and they all badmouth the ex-boyfriend or the enemy. And at one point they said, we hate your ex-boyfriend, but if you get together, we'll be on his side again. And then so it's basically that song. It's really quite sweet in a way. It's a celebration of female friends telling their friends exactly what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Which,
There's some love in that. There sure is.
yeah, which I mean, it seems wrong, but actually it's really meant that way. Like maybe there are just some people who are on your side who will just really blow the air up your ass. Forgive me, can we say this, Anna? Give you exactly what you need in that moment and are totally willing to switch
Yeah.
on a dime if necessary. And I think
Yeah.
as you were speaking, I was thinking about you have a line which I have at my fingertips, but you have a line that contrasts truth and facts, right? That
Yeah.
that and the truth are not the same
Yep.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe that's the answer a little bit, that we can
I
be
think
truthful
so.
with one another without necessarily always giving
Always
accurate
giving. Yeah.
facts,
That's
right?
right. That's
And
right.
maybe that's love, is truth,
Yeah.
which is not always with facts.
Yeah. Yeah. Truth without facts, I think, is a pretty good definition. I love it. Absolutely.
I think on that note, I want to sort of make sure that I've heard from everyone that there isn't anybody who has a sort of question or maybe even a comment or reflection that is digging at them right now.
Nobody's gonna follow you on that, Irina. It was too
Too good.
beautiful.
I'm just so excited for this novel, and it's so, we hear so much about how schematic kind of literary fiction has become, and that it has to fit this mold, and it's always the same thing, or like one of three things. And it is so amazing to find something that is not just like marginally different, but it's like not even in the same category in terms of its storytelling. And I don't know, I'm so excited about it. And I so want to see where this book is going and read the new one when it comes.
Probably not gonna be for a
I know.
while. These things take time, but thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well,
And
thank
read
you,
Portrait of a
Natasha.
Mirror as well. If you haven't read it yet.
Thank you, everyone here. This has been a great conversation, whether you were listening in or participating. But I'm wishing you all a wonderful Saturday. And yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure.
This was